Remember, said I, that although you all begin to feel very much at ease here, we are yet we are yet complete strangers to a variety of dangers, which may surprise us unawares. I charge you, therefore, to maintain good order, and keep together on the march. No darting off into the byways, Jack. No lingering behind to philosophize, Ernest. And now all hands to work. The greatest activity instantly prevailed in our camp. Some collected provisions, others packed kitchen utensils, tools, ropes, and hammocks, arranging them as burdens for the cow and ass. My wife pleaded for a seat on the ladder for her little friends, and assured me likewise that she could not possibly leave the poultry even for a night, nor exist for an hour without her magic bag. I agreed to do my best to please her, without downright cruelty to animals. Away ran the children to catch the cocks and hens. Great chasing, fluttering, and cackling ensued, but with no success whatsoever, until my wife recalled her panting sons, and scattered some handfuls of grain within the open tent, soon decoy the fowls and pigeons into the enclosure, where, when the curtain was dropped, they were easily caught, tied together, and placed on the cow. This amiable and phlegmatic animal had stood calmly chewing the cud while package after package was disposed on her broad back, nor did she nor did she now object even to the noisy addition to her load. I placed a couple of half hoops over all, and spreading sailcloth on them, put the fowls in the darkness, and they rapidly became quiet. And the cow, with the appearance of having a small wagon on her back, was ready to start. Franz was firmly seated on the ass, with immense bags and bundles in all sorts of sizes. They rose about him like cushions and pillows. His curly head rested on the precious magic bag, which surmounted all the rest. Having filled the tent with the things we had left behind, closing it carefully, and arranging chest and cask around it, we were finally ready to be off, each well equipped and in the highest spirits. Fritz and his mother led the van. Franz, the young cavalier, and the sober-minded cow followed them closely. Jack conducted the goats. One of these had also a rider, for Nips, the monkey, was seated on his foster mother, whose patience was sorely tried by his restlessness and playful tricks. The sheep were under Ernest's care, and I brought up the rear of this patriarchal band, while the two dogs kept constantly running backwards and forwards in the character of aides de camp. We seemed delightfully like those simple we seemed delightfully like those simple and pastoral tribes I have read of, said Ernest, as we proceeded, whose whole lives are spent in shifting from place to place, without any wish to settle. Yes, said I, among the Arabs, the Tartars, and some of the Eastern nations, this mode of life is natural. They, for the reason they are called nomads. These tribes are amply provided with camels and horses, and effect their journey more quickly and conveniently than we are likely to do with the deliberate quadrupeds of ours. Whatever your young folks may think, I suspect your mother and I will be quite satisfied with one such undertaking. At least I hope she will be contented with the nest she intends me to build for her, up in her wonderful trees. With honest pride I introduced my wife to my bridge, and after receiving from her what I can consider well-merited praise for my skill in its construction, we passed over it in grand procession, reinforced unexpectedly on the opposite side of the arrival of our cross-grained old sow. The perverse creature had obstinately obstinately resisted our attempts to bring her with us, but finding herself deserted, had followed her own accord, testifying in the most unmistakable manner, by angry grunts and squeals, her entire disapproval of our proceedings. I soon found we must, as before, turn down to the sea beach, for not only did the rank grass impede our progress, but it also tempted the animals to break away from us, and, but for our watchful dogs, we might have lost several of them. On the firm open sands we were making good way, when, to my annoyance, both our dogs suddenly left us, and springing into the thick cover to our right, commenced a furious barking, followed by howling as if in fear and violent pain. Not for a moment doubting that some dangerous animal was at hand, I hastened to the spot, remarking as I went the characteristic behavior of my three older sons. Fritz cocked his gun and advanced boldly, but with caution. Ernest looked discerned and drew back, but got ready to fire, while Jack hurried after Fritz with so much as unslinging his gun from his shoulders before I could come up with them. I heard Jack shouting excitedly, "Father, father, come quickly! A huge porcupine! A most enormous porcupine!" Sure enough, the dogs were rustling around and around with the porcupine, and having attempted to seize it, were already severely wounded by its quills. Each time they came near, the creature, with a rattling noise, bristled up its spines, somewhat to my amusement. While we were looking at the curious defense this creature was making, little Jack stepped close up to it, with a pocket pistol in his hand, and shot it dead, making sure of it by a couple of hearty raps on the head, and then giving way to a burst of boyish exultation, he called upon us to hurry to convey his prize to his mother. This was not by any means easy to do. Sundry attempts resulted in bloody fingers, till Jack, taking his pocket knife and fastening one corner around its neck, ran off, dragging it after him, to where his mother awaited us. "Hello, mother. Here's a jolly beast, isn't it? I shot it, and it's good to eat. Father says so. I only wish you had seen how terrified the dogs, and I heard the rattling rustling of its spines. Oh, it is a fearful creature!" Ernest exclaimed it carefully, pronounced its incisor teeth, its ears, feet, to resemble those of the human race, and pointed out to the curious crest of stiff hairs on its head and neck. I must I have read of another species," said he, "called the tuft-tailed porcupine, which must be even more curious looking than this. It has short, flat quills, and a scaly tail ending in an extraordinary tuft, like a bunch of narrow strips of parchment. It cannot be a disagreeable enemy to encounter as this fellow. Were you not afraid, Jack?" asked I. "Lest the porcupine should cast come of his quills like darts at you? Of course not," returned he. "I know well enough that is nothing but a fable." "A fable," said I. "Why, look at your mother. She is donning 5 or 6 spines out of each of the dogs." "Oh, those stuck into them when they so fiercely fell upon it in their attack. Those are the shortest quills, and seems very slightly fixed in its skin. The long quills bent aside when Gino pressed against them." "You are perfectly right, my boy," said I. "There is no such thing in the old idea of shooting out the spines. But now, shall we leave this prickly booty of yours, or attempt to take it with us?" "Oh, please, father, let's take it. Why, it is good to eat." Smiling at the child's eagerness, and willing to please him, I made somewhat of an awkward bundle of the porcupine, wrapping it in several folds of cloth, and adding it to the donkey's load. Our party then resumed the march, which, with little interruption, was continued steadily, until we came in sight of our future place of residence. The wonderful appearance of the enormous trees, and the calm beauty of the spot altogether, fully came up to the enthusiastic description which had been given to me, and my wife gladly heard me say that if an abode could be contrived among the branches, it would be the safest and most charming home in the world. We hastily unloaded the ass and the cow, securing them, as well as the sheep and goats. By taking the 4 feet loosely together, the doves and poultry were set at liberty, and we sat down to rest among the soft herbage while we laid our plans for the night. Fritz soon left us, and presently 2 shots were fired, and he appeared holding a fine tiger cat by its hind legs, which, with the interest delight he exhibited to each in turn. "Well done, Fritz," cried I. "Our cocks and hens would have had an unfortunate night of it but for this lucky shot of yours." It is to be hoped he has left no companion near at hand. You must be on the lookout. How curious it seems, remarked Ernest, that God should create harmful animals like this. To our feeble and narrow vision, many of the ways of our infinite internal mind are incomprehensible, I replied. What our limited reasons cannot grasp, let us be content to acknowledge as the workings of Almighty power and wisdom, and thankfully trust in that rock, which, were it not higher than we, would afford no sense of security to the immortal soul. That animals should prey upon one another is a means of preserving a due balance in the world of nature. What beautiful and warm furs are procured by hunters just in those countries where no other covering would defend the inhabitants from the wintry cold. As for instance, the skin of bears, wolverines, and arctic foxes, wild cats, and many others. The skin of a seal or a sea dog is also valuable, said Ernest. It is, I replied, and in its element that creature preys on fish as the dog did on the land animals before his race became domesticated by man. But now, Fritz, tell us how you obtained your prize. Observing that something moved among the branches, said he, I went softly around the tree with my gun, and making sure the creature was a wild cat, I fired and brought it down. It was severely wounded, but rising in a fury. It attempted to climb the tree, when I, luckily having a loaded pistol, gave it a quietus. And do tell me, father, what sort of cat is it? Is it a mercy? It is a mercy the brute did not fly at your throat instead of attempting to escape, said I. It belonged to a fierce and bloody and bloodthirsty race, that of the ocelots or tiger cats, natives of the tropical parts of America. I should say this is a margay, and at it would have proved a cruel foe, not only for our poultry, but also for our sheep and goats. I am well pleased that you have rid us of it. May I have the beautiful skin, father? And will you tell me what will be best used to make of it? I advise you to skin the animal very carefully, and of the handsome black and yellow tail, make a hunting belt for yourself. The paws, let me see. Why, I fancy the paws might be made famous case for a knife, fork, and spoon, and look well hanging from the belt. The skin of the body you had better preserve until you find a more suitable use for it. Oh, father, what a splendid plan, cried Jack. Do tell me some good use for my porcupine. I think its feet might make cases also. At least you may try. The quills, I am sure, may be used for packing needles, and for tipping arrows. I should try to make defense armor for the dogs out of the rest. They may fail, they may fall in with the foes more dangerous than any we have seen yet. To be sure, father. The very thing, shouted Jack in high glee. I have seen pictures of boar hunts, in which the dogs were protected by a sort of leather coat of mail. That will be that would be grand. After giving this advice, I got no peace until I had shown my boys how to act upon it, and in a short time each had his prize fastened up by the hind legs, and carefully slitting the skin, was stripping it from its carcass, while Ernest, meanwhile, carefully slitting was fetching large flat stones in order to form a fireplace, while Franz gathered sticks. As his mother was anxious to prepare some food, what sort of tree do you suppose this to be, father? Inquired Ernest, seeing my examining that under which we were encamping. It's not the leaf something like a walnut. This there is a resemblance, but in my opinion these gigantic trees must be mangroves or wild figs. I have heard their enormous height described, and also the peculiarity of the arching roots supporting the main trunk raised above the soil. Just then little Franz came up with a large bundle of sticks, and his mouth full of something he was eating with evident satisfaction. Oh, shoot. Sorry. Where did I stop? Little Franz came up with a large bundle of sticks, and his mouth full of something he was eating with evident satisfaction. "Oh, mother," he cried, "this is so good, so delicious!" "Greedy little boy!" exclaimed she in fright. What have you got there? Don't swallow it. Whatever you do, very likely it is poisonous. Spit it out this minute." And his anxious mother quickly extracted from the rosy little mouth the remains of a small fig. "Where did you find this?" said I. "There are thousands lying among the grass yonder," replied the little boy. "They taste very nice. I thought poison was nasty." "Do you think they will hurt me? The pigeons and the hens are gobbling them all up with all their might and main, papa." "I think you have no cause for alarm, dear wife," I said. "The trees seem to be fig-bearing mangroves of the Antilles. But remember, friends, you must never eat anything first without showing it to me. Never mind how good it seems. If birds and monkeys eat a fruit or vegetable, it is usually safe to believe it is wholesome," added I, turning to the other boys, who, instantly taking the hint, coaxed Franz to give them the figs he still had in his pocket, and ran to offer them to Nips, who was closely watching the skinning of the tiger cat and porcupine, apparently giving his opinion on the subject with much chattering and gesticulation. "Here, Nips, allow me to present you with a fig," cried Jack, holding out one of the little funny creatures. Nip took it readily, and after turning it about and sniffing and smelling it, he popped it into his mouth with such a droll grimace of delight and satisfaction that the boys all laughed and clapped their hands, crying, "Bravo, Nips! You know a good thing when you see it, don't you, old fellow? Hooray!" My wife, with her hands set at rest on the question of the figs, now continued her preparations for dinner. The flesh of the margay was given to the dogs, but part of the porcupine was put in a fire to boil, while we preserved the rest for roasting. I employed myself in contriving needles for my wife's work by boring holes at one end of the quills, which I did by means of a red-hot nail, and I soon had a nice packet of various sizes, which pleased her immensely. I had also laid plans for making proper harness for our beasts of burden, but could not attempt to begin that while many wants were more pressing demanded our attention. We examined the different trees and chose one which seemed most suited to our purpose. The branches spread at a great height above us, and I made the boys try it where possible to throw sticks or stones over one of these, my intention being to construct a rope ladder. If we could once succeed in getting a string across a strong bough, finding we could not succeed in that way, I resolved another scheme in my mind, and meantime went with Jack and Fritz to a small brook close by, where I showed them how to place the skins to steep and soften in the water, with stones placed on them to keep them beneath the surface. When dinner was over, I prepared our night quarters. I first slung our hammocks from the roots of the tree, which meeting above us formed an arched roof. Then, covered with the whole with sailcloth, we made a temporary tent, which would at least keep off the night damps and noxious insects, leaving my wife engaged in making a set of harnesses for the ass and the cow, whose strength I intended to employ the following day in drawing the beams up to the tree. I walked down with Fritz and Ernest to the beach to look for suitable wood for building our new abode, only to discover, if possible, some light rods to form a ladder. For some time we hunted in vain. Nothing but rough driftwood was to be seen, utterly unfit for our purpose. Ernest at length pointed out a quantity of bamboos, half buried in the sand. These were exactly what I wanted, and stripped them of their leaves. I cut them into lengths about 5 feet each. These I bound in bundles to carry to the tree. I then began to look about for some slight reeds to serve our arrows. I presently saw what I required in the copse of a little distance. We advanced cautiously, lest the thicket should contain some wild beast or venomous serpent. Gino rushed ahead, as did so a flock of flamingos, which had been quietly feeding, rose into the air. Fritz, instantly firing, brought a couple of the birds to the ground, the rest of the squadron sailing away in perfect order. Their plumage continually changed as they flew, from beautiful rose to pure white, as alternately their snowy wings and rosy breasts were visible. One of those which fell was perfectly dead, and the other appeared only slightly wounded in the wing, for it made off across the swampy ground. I attempted to follow, but soon found that progress was impossible in the marsh. Gino, however, chased the bird and seized it, speedily brought it to my feet. Fritz and nurse were delighted at the sight of our prize. "What a handsome bird!" exclaimed they. "It is much hurt. Let us tame it and let it run about with the fowls." "Its plumage is much more brilliant than that of the dead one," remarked Fritz. "Yes," said Ernest. "This is a full-grown bird, while yours is younger. It is some years before they reach perfection. See what long, active legs it has, like those of a stork, while with its great webbed feet it can swim faster than a goose." Earth, air, or water, it is all the same to the flamingo. It is equally at home in any of the three. "Well," said Fritz, "let us take to the dead one to the mother, to mother, and get her to introduce it to the other element, and see what it will make of that. If it is young and tender, as you say, it should make a delicious roast." Fritz and Ernest then carried the birds and bamboo to the tree, while I proceeded to cut my reeds. I chose those which had flowered, knowing that they were harder, and having cut a sufficient quantity of these, I selected one or two of them of the tallest canes I could find to assist me in measuring the height of the tree. I then bound them together and returned to my family. "Do you mean to keep this great hungry bird Fritz has brought?" said my wife. "It is another mouth to feed, remember, and provisions are still scarce." "Luckily," I replied, "the flamingo will not eat grain like our poultry, but will be quite satisfied with insects, fish, and little crabs, which it will pick up for itself. Pray reassure yourself. Therefore let me see to the poor bird's wound." So saying, I procured some wine and butter, and anointing the wing, which, though hurt, was not broken, I bound it up, and then took the bird to stream, where I had fastened it with a long cord to a stake, and left it to shift for itself. In a few days the wound was healed, and the bird, subdued by kind treatment, became rapidly tame. While I was thus employed, my sons were endeavoring to ascertain the height of the lowest branch of the tree from the ground. They had fastened together the long reeds I had brought with them, and they were trying to measure the distance, but in vain. They soon found that there were rods 10 times their length. They could not touch the branch. "Hello, my boys," I said, when I discovered that they were about. "This is not the way to set work. Geometry will simplify the operation considerably. With its help and attitude of the highest mountains are ascertained, we may, therefore, easily find the height of the branch." So saying, I measured out a certain distance from the base of the tree, and marked the spot. And then, by means of a rod, whose length I knew, and imaginary lines, I calculated the angle subtended by the trunk of the tree from the ground to the root of the branch. This done, I was able to discover the height required, and, to the astonishment of my younger children, announced that they were henceforth live 30 feet above ground. This I wanted to know, that I might construct a ladder to the necessary length, telling Fritz to collect all our cord, and the others to roll all the twine into a ball. I sat down, taking the reeds, speedily manufactured half a dozen arrows, and feathered them from the dead flamingo. I then took a strong bamboo, bent it, and strung it so as to form a bow. When the boys saw that I had done, they were delighted, and begged to have the pleasure of firing the first shot. "No, no," said I. "I did not make this for mere pleasure, nor is it intended to be a weapon. The arrows are pointless. Elizabeth," I continued to my wife, "can you supply me with a ball of stout thread from your wonderful bag?" "Certainly," she replied. I think that a ball of thread was the first thing to enter the bag, and diving her hand deep in, she drew out the very thing I wanted. "Now, boys," I said, "I am going to fire the first shot," and I fastened one end of the thread to one of my arrows, and aimed it at the large branch above me. The arrow flew upwards, and bore the thread over the branch, and fell at our feet. Thus was the first step in our undertaking accomplished. Now for the rope ladder. Fritz had obtained 2 coils of cord, each about 40 feet in length. These we stretched on the ground side by side. Then Fritz cut the bamboo into pieces of 2 feet for the steps of the ladder. As he had handed them to me, I passed them through the knots which I had prepared in the ropes, while Jack fixed each end with a nail driven through the wood. When the ladder was finished, I carried over the bow of rope by which it might be hauled up. This done, I fixed the lower end of the ladder firmly to the ground by means of stakes, and all was ready for the ascent. The boys, who had been watching me with intent interest, were each eager to be first. Jack shall have the honor, said I, as he is the lightest. So up with you, my boy, and do not break your neck. Jack, who was so inactive as a monkey, sprang up the ladder and quickly gained to the top. 3 cheers for the nest, he exclaimed, waving his cap. Hurrah, hurrah, hurrah for our jolly nest! What a grand house we will have up here! Come along, Fritz. His brother was soon by his side, and with a hammer and nails secured the ladder yet more securely. I followed with an axe, and took a survey of the tree. It was admirably suited to our purpose. The branches were very strong, and so closely interwoven that no beams would be required to form the flooring. But when some of the boughs were looped and cleared away, a few planks would be quite sufficient. I now called for a pulley, which my wife fastened to the cord hanging beside the ladder. I hauled it up, and finding the boys rather in my way, told them to go down a while I proceeded to fasten the pulley to a stout branch above me, that we might be able to haul up some of the beams we should require the next day. I then made other preparations that there might be no delay on the morrow, and the bright moon having arisen, I, by its light, continued working until I was quite worn out, and then at length descended. I reached the ground, but to my surprise found that the 2 boys were not there. They had not been seen. A moment afterwards, however, all anxiety was dispelled, for amongst the topmost boughs I heard their young voices raised in the evening hymn. Instead of descending, they had, while I was busy, climbed upwards, and had been sitting in silent admiration in the moonlight scene high above me. They now joined us, and my wife showed me the results of her labor. She had made 2 complete sets of harnesses. I congratulated her upon her success, and we then sat down to supper. On a cloth spread out upon the grass were arranged a roast shoulder of porcupine, a delicious bowl of soup made from a piece of the same animal, cheese, butter, and biscuits, forming a most tempting repast. Having done this ample justice, we collected our cattle, the pigeons, the fowls, having retired to roost on the neighboring trees, and on the steps of our ladder we made up a glorious fire to keep off any prowling wild beasts, and ourselves lay down. The children, in spite of the novelty of the hammocks, were quickly asleep. In vain I tried to follow their example. 1,000 anxious thoughts presented themselves, and as quickly as I dispelled them, others rose in their place. The night wore on, and I was still awake. The fire burned low, and I rose and replenished it with dry fuel. Then again I climbed into my hammock, and towards morning fell asleep. Early next morning we were astir, and dispersed to our various occupations. My wife milked the goats and cow while we gave the animals their food, after which we went down to the beach to collect more wood for our building operations. To the larger beams we harnessed the cow and ass, while we ourselves dragged up the remainder. Fritz and I then ascended the tree and finished the preparations. I had begun the night before. All useless boughs we lopped off, leaving a few about 6 feet from the floor, from which we might sling our hammocks, and others still higher, to support a temporary roof of sailcloth. My wife made fast the planks to the rope passed through the block I had fixed to the bow above us, and by this means Fritz and I hauled them up. These were arranged side by side on the foundation of boughs, so as to form a smooth, solid floor. Round this platform build a bulwark of planks, and then throwing the sailcloth over the higher branches, we drew it down and firmly nailed it in. Our house was thus enclosed on 3 sides, for behind the great trunk protect us, while the front was left open to admit the fresh sea breeze, which blew directly in. We then hauled up our hammocks and bedding, and slung them from the branches we had left for that purpose. A few hours of daylight still remaining, we cleared the floor from leaves and chips, and then descended to fashion a table and a few benches from the remainder of the wood. After working like slaves all day, Fritz and I flung ourselves on the grass, while my wife arranged supper on the table we had just made. "Come," said she at length, "come and taste flamenco stew, and tell me how you like it." Ernest, following his directions, laughing at the idea of Ernest turning scientific cook, we sat down. The fowls gathered around us to pick up the crumbs, and the tame flamenco joined them, while Master Nips skipped about from one to the other, chattering and mimicking our gestures continually. To my wife's joy, the sow appeared shortly after, and was presented with all the milk that remained from the day's stock, that she might of no use to us, as it will be sour before the morning in this hot climate. "You are quite right," I replied, "but we must contrive to make it of use. The next time Fritz and I return to the wreck, we will bring off a churn amongst the other things we require." "Must you really go again to that dreadful wreck?" said my wife, shuddering. "You have no idea how anxious I am when you go away there." "Go we must, I am afraid," I replied, "but not for the day or two yet. Come, it is getting late. We and the chickens must go to roost." We lit our watch fires, and, leaving the dogs on guard below, ascended the ladder. Fritz, Ernest, and Jack were up in a moment. Their mother followed very cautiously, for though she had originated the idea of building a nest, she yet hesitated to entrust herself at such a terrific height from the ground. When she was safely landed in the house, taking little friends on my back, I had let go the fastenings which secure the lower end of the ladder to the ground, and swinging to and fro, slowly ascended. For when the then for the first time we stood all together in our new home. I drew up the ladder, and with great sense of security than I had enjoyed since we landed on the island, offered up our evening prayer, and retired for the night.